All right, so I was supposed to give this talk in the afternoon, so you wouldn't have to listen to me twice in a row, and so I wouldn't have to stand for 2 hours. Okay, the list of the major reforms. And so we've talked about just now, I mean, I guess it's kind of consistent to continue, talk about reforming the law and the Constitution, and then talk about some of the policy reforms. And there's way too much for me to talk about here. I mean, I'd love to talk about all of it, but there's way too much to talk about it. But I have a huge, pretty long list of reforms that cover everything from the military and strategic to the political systems, to the law, legislation, and regulation, to rights and obligations. But taxation changes, the economy changes, consumer protection changes, credit and finance changes, benefits changes, restoring the primacy of family, the norms, the commons, education, higher education. Those are just the most important ones we've put through. It's not all of them. So I can't cover all that material. What I can try to do today is give you a feeling for the scope of work we've put into it. Again, but if you get how simple it is, we're trying to fix these holes and we're trying to restore the primacy of the family. Does that make sense? That's it. That's really what we're trying to do. Now, at the macro level, that's our goal. Why is it? Because it's almost impossible to have raise a family today. And so almost everything we've done is to try to make possible the ability for people to have stable intergenerational families. So I'm thinking, what do I want to cover first? I think probably does anyone know what the Roman reforms were? How many history nerds do we have here who know who did the Roman reforms? Okay, I'm not going to tell you. You have to look it up. But these are probably the greatest reforms since the Roman age. For the same reason, the Romans had their reforms. Now, I'm not a fan of leftist economists. I'm certainly not a fan of Mr. Piketty. But, okay, if anybody knows economics, that brings about a chuckle. But Piketty has been saying that we have to have socialism to prevent the concentration of wealth. When the answer is, whenever we get an overconcentration of wealth, it means something's broken and we need to fix whatever processes are in place that are allowing the overconcentration of wealth. Well, how do we know it's an overconcentration of wealth? When it's extractive rather than productive. When it's prohibitive rather than cooperative. And does anyone think, the one thing I figured out early as an economist was, why the hell do we pay consumer interest? Why do we pay interest on a house, on a car? The only point of interest is to pull forward, to pay somebody to pull forward their investment so that you can use time now instead of later. But by the time it gets to the consumer, there's no point in interest at all. I mean, we're borrowing from ourselves, for Christ's sake. Why are we paying interest on it? Now, there's some administrative overhead, but there's no point in paying interest on what it is. What percentage of your income goes to interest payments? It's actually less than you think, but it's not a small number. 20%, a third. What would you do with a third more money? I just talked about the financial side, but what about credentialists? The people out there in the bureaucracy who are, where the greatest concentration of wealth is in the country now? It's around D.C. That's the highest income region in the country. You think they're earning that money? The biggest problem with them is that they're treating their peers in other governments and other bureaucracies as their customer base. They're not treating us as their customer base. And no, I'm not trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are, if you look at the Forestry Service, it's pretty hard to complain about them, except when they close parks because we've cut the budget, right? And because we've had a government shutdown. There's no reason to cut the goddamn parks, right? It's just to punish the people. So the first set of reforms is to reorganize the strategic position of the country, which Mr. Trump did fairly well, I got to tell you. I mean, if you want to complain about, somebody can complain about, I don't complain about him, I think he's hysterical. But if anybody wants to complain about Trump, because he's freaking hysterical. But if you want to complain about him, it's not going to be about his saying, geostrategically we're screwed and this has got to stop because it's burning the American middle class in order for us to play all this game, and we can't afford it anymore. So we're not set up for maintaining a position of our economy and our quality of life in a world where we no longer have the 400 years of technological, institutional, and scientific and cultural advantage over peers, competitors. We're just not there anymore, and we're not going to be anymore. And at the rate we're producing babies, I did my job. I have my 3, but at the rate we're producing babies, there's not going to be any of us at all. So we have to make that possible for people and desirable. But we have to be prepared for what's called total war. Total war means that that you have the capacity to pivot the entire culture toward the conduct of war. That's what Napoleon did. That's his primary invention. He's a good battlefield commander, but he turned the whole economy of France into the military when necessary and back out. Well, who did that before? They're called Romans. Turns out it works really effectively, but only if you have the institutions set up to do it. How well did the CDC and the WHO do in being prepared for the crisis that they had? We have this thing called war games, and the military does them. Well, they kind of fudge the numbers now and then. I mean, I don't know if you know about the Persian Gulf problem we had a little while ago, where they pit the sort of red team and blue team, us being the blue team, and the red team won against our Navy because they used the tactics that the terrorists use instead of the tactics that our militaries use. It was embarrassing, so they had to change the rules and go back and have it again so that the Navy could win. But that's the point is, did the CDC and the WHO were captured for personal use, for political use. They were not set up to organize to actually bring anything about. We have the Federal Emergency Management Agency. You know people in it, how many people are in it, and how many resources they have? I think they have 1,500 people, and they got nothing. What they can do is make a phone call. To whom? When I was a kid, we had a Hurricane Agnes, which was a great name for a hurricane. And it came through, and my little New York State town right on a lake, and it completely destroyed the lakeshore businesses, which was my father's business's last business on the lakeshore, and so it was at the highest position. And so the water didn't get into my father's business, but everybody else's. Where do you think the whole town was? Helping all those businesses get out from the water. That's what we just took school off and went down and pulling rotten meat out of a restaurant's basement. Cold storage is not a smell you ever want to experience again, and my family's in the funeral business. So the post-war order is over. We've equilibrated our advantage. We have a private capitalist investment in research rather than state venture capitalism. So my argument is the monarchies acted a lot more like VCs, and our VCs are acting a lot more like monarchies, and our government isn't. It's just extracting things from people in the private sector are doing, but it's not pursuing long-term capital investment. Why is it that you need an Elon Musk to try to make a battery with the energy density of gasoline? We knew about this in the 60s, and the government didn't invest in it. Why is it that, even fusion, you know how much money's in fusion right now? I'm not quite positive this can happen. I mean, I know the math pretty well, and I'm like, this looks sketchy to me. But if we get fusion, hey, that's great. But why isn't the government funding that? It used to be that the evil military-industrial complex was the innovator, and then they took the innovations and they just gave it away to the market sector, and the market sector profited by taking these innovations out. But we don't have that mission in our government anymore. We don't have a group of people in the government whose mission is to keep us competitively advantaged. How many people do you think in the Chinese system have that? Lots. It's lots. It's like everyone. What do you think? If you go to look at Israel's military procurement is freaking hysterical. It's brilliant. Right? How thick is their military procurement? It's trivial. You know how long it takes them to do something? No time at all. I think it's funny because my name's Doolittle. Of course, General Jimmy Doolittle was the guy who bombed Tokyo. And so one of his things after post-war was, because he was an engineer, one of the things post-war is Eisenhower asked him to look at this thing called the military-industrial complex and report back. So he spent time going through it, and he's basically came back as, yeah, it's fucked, but you can't do any better. We don't have inventories of capacity. In other words, can you believe we have outsourced our ability to make basic medications? We couldn't, or the man, I'm starting to get on mass thing because I'm like, should I talk about this with this crowd? Because they're going to kill me. Right? Oh, they're going to take it sideways. But we couldn't even make that stuff, right? So, I mean, right now, I don't know if you know about this, but you know where primers are made? You know how much ammunition we burn through? You know where primers are made? Italy. The Italians can't organize a fucking birthday party. It's like, why is something like primers for ammunition not like part of, just like there should be sitting there ready to roll on a moment's notice, right? Or we use the man pads, the man portable air defense, right? What are they? Javelins. Right? We use like 8 years of capacity in Ukraine in 1 year. I'm like, we need to produce 8 years of capacity in like 5 minutes if we actually want to use it. So we've got all these naval ships out there, all these airplanes, whatever. Do you know how many days worth of ammunition we have? It's like 6 weeks. We actually can't fight a war, not because we don't have the men, the machines, the technology. We don't have the fucking ammunition. And you wonder why. I'm like, Second Amendment? Why? Well, that they can only fight for 6 weeks before they got to go home. I guess it's up to us then, right? I mean, so there's no inventories of capacity. What was that? I didn't hear that.
We just need 7 weeks of ammunition.
There's a problem in that the military wants to own everything, but they actually underpay the servicemen by about 3. I don't know if you know how it works. There's this grid, and there's like, here's your rank and here's your level or time in service. It's about 3 levels below what it needs to be to make it even rational for a person to participate in the military. So that's out there. So that's another under expenditure. The second thing, it's how many contractors we're using to keep costs down instead of maintaining the capacity to produce and execute. We have too many contractors. Now, there's a value in the private-public partnership, but it's different. It should be that a lot of technical people are in technical roles, and they can be paid market prices, right? And they have to be, but we don't allow that. We have to use contractors when there's no reason the military just doesn't have the same equivalent of an officer. If I joined the military, I'd be an officer. I mean, if they'd let me, I mean, come on. But if I'd be an officer, and it's a profession, you can quit it. You can resign your commission, right? There's no reason we can't have the equivalent in technologists, so that we don't have to have this game of pretending everybody's got to be a grunt first before they actually do something. We have to restore adaptive government, which is one of the things that the Romans did very well. What's that joke about? There's some joke going around about all men bringing up the Rome or something. Yeah. How many times a day do you think about Rome? Well, you know what? Just go back. It's like our point of reference. Well, they did most of the stuff right. We broke it down. We didn't get it right again to Napoleon, and even now we're sort of not caught up. So, I mean, of course we're going to think about it when we see a program. It's the sort of reference point we have. And yeah, I'm not wearing those skirts. I'm sorry. That's not happening. So there's basically stages a government needs to address. A time of war, a time of going concern, and a time of windfalls. Our post-war period was a time of windfalls, but we treated it like a going concern. We don't have the ability, as the Romans did, to say we're at war and change the government to a war government, be in a steady state, and change back to, and when we're in windfalls, to experience windfalls. So what happens, of course, is what happened to what used to be the hardworking people called the Spanish. is that you get gold flooded in from the New World, and it makes you think that you're going to live at this current standard of living, and then all of a sudden you can't do that anymore, but you maintain all the habits of it. So this is happening to the United States right now. We don't realize that the post-war thing was a windfall, and we don't have a mechanism to switch back to it. Why? Because during the windfall, they created intergenerational dependencies that are no longer serviceable. So how do we fix that? The Singapore model. It's sort of like matching. You actually mandatorily save, and they mandatorily match, but it's actually your freaking money. And you can spend it on your health care, on unemployment, whatever you want, retirement, however you want. And if you're in a family, you can pool it. So if I want to pay for my daughter's heart surgery, my daughter doesn't have heart surgery. If I have a daughter that has heart surgery, we can all pool a little bit of money together and pay for her heart surgery. It isn't always dependent on her, and it isn't always externalized to other people in the population. It means that we get the balance between the limited productivity of the individual and the maximum assurance by all, while still making the individual responsible for his or her actions. It's the best systems man has invented. All right, now I'm going to move to the political. So in the political, am I doing okay? Are these okay? Are these interesting? Am I going at the right level of depth? Right? Good. I need some more hands back there because I can't see. All right? All right. So we have to restore the federation of sovereign states. So most of what we're doing is we're suggesting that we devolve the government out of the post-Civil War era and not complain about it, because they did have a rational desire to capture the continent from east to west to prevent those warlike Europeans from coming over and starting a problem over here. Now we get to do it. So, but we had a warlike problem. The thing is, though, there's too much desire to make the government a federal monopoly over 11 different civilizations that are part of America. I like the Southern folk myself. Although you can trash talk with New England people, and I may not be able to get over that. I like that too much. So we're trying to bring back the federation of sovereign states, and the federal government providing its minimum ability, which is defense, trade policy, negotiation, insurance. Because what is a government? It's an insurer of last resort. The insurer of last resort has a second property of saying, well, our job is to produce a market for the resolution of differences, the courts, and a resolution of wants, the commons. And what are the commons? Legislation. But our federal governments try to take too much control. And so we need to break it down. And most of our control is the fact that people in one part of the country do not want to live like people in the other part of the country. And this whole monopoly thing is, where is that coming from? Coming from the left. They say, well, the right's authoritarian. No, we're authoritarian in preventing you from making authority. So we're going to restore the Constitution to its original intention of a large number of small European states, each in serving the interests of constituents. So what we try to do is actually make it even better than that. We're saying, well, let's break it into city-states. Let's break it into city-states to divorce the cities from the territories. So once you have a city-state, you have your own freedom, but you're no longer able to impose it on the territory of people around you. And why? Because there's a different normative economy in a city-state or a city, urban density, where you cannot bear responsibility for anything, and in a suburb or a rural area where you must bear responsibility for the commons. So those two things create opposite interests. They create a people who cannot bear responsibility for any scope, and people who must bear responsibility for scope of difference. That makes us have opposing interests. So we need separate governments. So we're restoring the political power and choice to the states, which is I think the court is doing already. We're restoring the market for commons in the legislature. We're trying to restore the monarchy, if at all possible. Where the monarchies, as I said in last talk, are judges of last resort. We're trying to restore the reorganization of elites from credentialists, which is a dirty word. How many people understand the credentialist dirty word, right? Not enough. Right? A credentialist is a dirty word. It means someone who got told they went to college and now they're smart, instead of somebody who demonstrated their capacity to work with real human beings in the real world, given our distribution of abilities, neither the military or commerce or family for that matter, or faith. So our bigger problem is we have a world full of credentialists. We brought over the illusion of German bureaucracy, and we were hypnotized by the Soviet bureaucracy. And so both of these things have led our government to a credentialist government. And who's the historian who said, wow, that's a really bad idea? Turchin. I love Turchin. He's wonderful. So we replace a credentialed government with competent government because they have an empirical history with evidence that they can govern, not that they have the stamp of approval to work in government. I already said we provide self-determination by state formation with everyone. The minimum state size is actually something we know. It's around 300,000 people. It actually turns out that 5 to 10 million is the optimum state size. How many German principalities were there? Anybody know? There's over 300 of them. Right, so how many principalities would we need in this country, in this territory?
2,000.
We need a lot, right? So the thing is, if I want to be part of a 10 million or $20 million policy, that's fine, right? But I can't exercise my will and preferences on those people who want to have a 300,000 population, because we have different interests and different abilities. Because the denser the population, the lower the opportunity cost, but the lower the responsibility any of us can bear for the commons maintaining it. So you have to, in order to have many, you have to have authority. In order to have sovereignty, you have to have few. What our primary interest is restoring power distance, right? The limited power distance between people so that the people can exercise their sovereignty through their governments. This can only be done at small scale, and because then at small scale can be scaled through concurrency into larger scales. We can discover it. But this means that local, not national, policy has to, as long as it doesn't violate the natural law, local policy has to be sovereign. And the next one is restoring voluntary association and disassociation. Now, I know everybody in here knows this one, right? That means, look, I don't want to work with you. I don't want to work with you. I don't want you in my shop either. I mean, the whole thing of that I can make the people. What's the birthday cake thing, right? It's the birthday cake thing. That's like completely out of hand. I mean, I understand if it's a supermarket, you have to have a supermarket. Somebody's got to be able to go get food. But I don't understand why I got to make a cake about something I find offensive. And I don't have the right to impose that on anyone. There's no reason for it. Yet the state is mandating that by forcing involuntary association. Now, how many people have lived in neighborhoods where you have a lot of covenants? A covenant is a thing that says you can sell your house to only these people and you have to do this stuff, and you have lots of nosy neighbors that tell you what to do, and I actually sued somebody to make them change their house color. And this gets rid of all this employment nonsense, right? Look, if I want to hire Mennonites in my company, I'm going to do that, right? In my company, I always hire pretty girls. You know why? Because they sell shit way better than ugly guys. Well, it's just... Yeah, it's like I actually made a lot of. I remember making this point to Cindy, who was a woman I hired out of digital. I said, I have a really simple attitude, and that's that you can get away with more shit than I can in front of a customer. And then if it doesn't work for you, I can come in and say it's all my fault, and we win. Right, which is so, and it's the same thing for guys. I mean, if I want a risk manager, I want a guy there because we don't mind risk management. So, the point I'm saying is, we all have different people we want to work with, and forcing us to work with people we don't want to, and putting us under threat of sanctions if we don't. It doesn't help us form the trust of the social bonds we want, both in our society and in our workplaces. Don't politicize the workplace. We want to restore legitimacy to the Constitution and the law. I think I've done that already. I'm not going to cover all these. I think that's too much material. There's just lots of it. The next thing is we're going to enumerate rights, obligations, and alienations. And we're going to, this is where Martin and I did all the painful stuff, which is we enumerated all the kinds of ways you can tell the truth and all the ways you can, and it's strictly constructed from sovereignty. It's a formal logic of all rights and obligations through. And guess what the number one right and obligation is? How do you ensure the sovereignty of every other man?
Arms.
That's right. So what's the first law?
Bear.
You must. You don't get a fucking choice. Otherwise, you're not a citizen. Right? And so we enumerate so where the current Constitution has some rights, we strictly construct all necessary rights. So there's no opinion on what's right and wrong and what's a right and what's a privilege. If we want to vote ourselves a privilege, that's fine, but it's not a right. If I show you this huge page we have, it's like 80 pages. I don't know, Martin, do you know how many pages it is? Of all our policy changes at this point. And in that document, most of it's rights, obligations, and alienations. And of that, lying is probably half. So you have an obligation not to engage in lying. At least in public, to the public, and matters public. If my wife tells me I look handsome today, that's a lie. But it's a nicety. That's like a white lie. Am I doing okay with these? You get an idea how much detail we're going into? All right. So the next, I've gone over rights, obligations, and alienations. That includes reformations of the courts. I'm not going to get into that detail because I'm more interested in emphasizing the things that bring back our liberty, sovereignty, reciprocity, and trust in one another, because we want to live in a high trust society and with the benefits of the high trust society, which is the production of commons that reduce the cost of existence for all of us, even if eliminating dramatically the differences in our income as anything meaningful. Does anybody get how important that is? If we produce high trust commons, all we have left to argue about is signaling. It's not about survival or costs or stress. It's about making the commons sufficiently that most everything left is signaling, and whether you're lazy. So the next thing we're going to talk about is taxes and financial easing. Is this an interesting subject? Yeah. Yes. The entire tax system will be vacated and replaced with a flat and invariable tax of 18% and a flat sales tax, variable and revised annually. I don't think that's true. And I do like that there's a flat tax on income. I just think that the problem we're going to get to is that it actually doesn't make any sense to tax a whole lot of the population. If you look at the bottom half of the population, you know what percentage of the taxes they contribute? Just guess. It's 3%. You think that if we ask the upper classes to say, well, we just need to make up 3%, they're going to care? No. If you tell me I got to make up 20%, I'm going to care. If you tell me 3%, why do you make a guy who's a tradesman, who works with his body, whose body is burned out by age 45, that he's got to pay taxes and not only do his own tax reporting? It's insane. So when we say a flat tax, I'm more interested in keeping the maximum number low. But it turns out, contrary to what we'd like to believe, an income tax is actually the least bad tax. It's the least bad tax because it's proportional and it's actually on income. And income is what the government makes possible by creating rule of law and property rights. High trust. So go ahead.
So, but I mean, with a lot of the stuff, like with our taxes and what they're being contributed to right now, if we started drifting our taxes back, I mean, will we even need half of what they're deducting from us in the first place?
That's a great question. The real problem, and we're not going to get out of this problem, the real problem is benefits. Fundamentally, I say this and economists try to argue with me and I'm like, you're wrong, and go ahead and argue with me. But the answer is that our military doesn't cost us anything. Because we inflate it away, and it turns out that the discounts we get from it are more than make up for it. We'd be as poor as Europeans otherwise. So that doesn't matter. What matters is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the related benefits. All that Social Security, that's mandatory spending. But discretionary spending, it's a third of the budget. that's like, what is it, $1 trillion? Sounds like a lot of money, right? Funny money. But so it doesn't really matter. There's discretionary. The problem with discretionary spending is we don't like what they're spending it on. Right? It's more of what are you spending it on that's decreasing people's demand for responsibility rather than increasing people's demand for responsibility. And that's not only fair. I mean, if people are going to be responsible, you have to make them capable of being responsible. Is our education system doing that? So we have to fix the tax system, but mostly, and I won't go through the 30 changes we have here because it's just too much to go through. But basically, if you say, look, a progressive tax system works pretty well because it basically provides a return. It's like when you run a mall. Like anybody, I know a lot about malls because I used to open up businesses in malls. And you open a mall, and a mall's like, well, okay, I got to worry about the whole economy of the mall. It's not just me, right? I only benefit if the whole mall does well. So it might seem good if I put all these chain stores in there, but if that'll just make it so it's like every other mall, nobody will come. So I have to have this variety of stores in order to make people feel you get the whole complexity. Well, it's the same thing for our it's the same thing when you think about the preservation of the economy. So we need to have all these things. They need to work together really well. But the tax system needs to think about, okay, I got to charge people what produces the distribution we want. Does that make sense? I'm trying to bulldoze through this, and I'm a little worried that if I don't know what the right level of detail is. So there's an awful lot of there's no juridical defense in taxes. In other words, they can just come and take your shit. Do we have rule of law?
No.
Rule of law requires juridical defense. I don't think that really bothers me. I mean, other than taking gold-plated AK-47s from drug dealers. I mean, this whole seizure, it's called asset seizure? Yes. Asset seizure? Come on, guys, is that juridical defense? No. So we have too much of that going on where, I think I've told you my story. One of the things that made me devote my life to this was when I was in Ukraine and I don't do my own taxes. I have a firm do it. And they do all of our management team because it's complicated. And so I'm like, there's a date mistake on your freaking taxes, and so you might owe us $2 million. And of course, they owe me money. And they shut down all my bank accounts worldwide while I'm in a foreign country in the middle of a civil war trying to keep a business alive. I mean, and there's no juridical defense. I can't go to a court and say, you need to stay this because this is all the issue here. There's nothing you can do. They go after small business people for pittances. And they're trying to get how many new IRS agents?
87,000.
This is the worst.
Aren't they trying to get them to where they're armed too?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
One of the biggest things that's causing a problem in the United States is, and I'm as someone who builds businesses that grow. My whole thing is I build growth companies and I sell them, right? So I have to double a business every year to 2 years. So that's all I think about. How can I do that? How can I build a management team? How can I build the customers? You know what the real problem is? You can't borrow the fucking money to float the salaries. The real problem is to prevent your growth is you cannot borrow enough money to pay people salaries between right now so that you get when you're going to get paid in 90 days. So why are we making people pay for float? Europeans don't do it. You know how long it takes for a bill to get overdue in Europe? Guess. No guesses? Come on. Go, what's freaking absurd?
7 years?
Okay, now that's kind of out there. No, it's 6 months to a year.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Now, if you go to a consumer bank in Canada and you don't know how to pay your bills, the freaking person will sit there and help pay your bill, help do your bill paying for you. That's good management. If you, where's the other one I was trying to think of? So pay your bills, banks. So we're not helping people get through life. What about the bankless people? People who can't get a bank account and they have to go use a check cashing agency and lose 20% of their income just because they don't have a bank account. So why do we have that float? It doesn't make any sense at all. Why do we have taxes? So I'm trying to pick the top ones out of here that don't resonate. Why does the Treasury protect the lender instead of the borrower? Why are the financial sector getting away with all the nonsense it does? They privatize gains and socialize losses. Where the hell do you think I got it from? The saying from. They privatize gains, socialize losses. So I've already talked to you about the Singapore model. That's the comprehensive change to the financial unemployment health retirement reforms. Does everybody understand how Singapore does it? I could have covered that. You basically get a debit card for your different kinds of accounts, and if you want to pay for your health care, whatever, and it's state subsidized. So we don't we have in that problem? Hey Brad, how much of a problem are insurance companies in the medical profession? Oh. All right, let me ask another question. Why are there insurance companies at all? Why are there? What the hell do you think the government is? It's the insurer of last resort, it's the insurance company. Why are we paying people to charge us money to take and privatize the investments when it's our money? We can put it in. I sound like a socialist now? Yeah. It just turns out to be true. There's no reason for it. There's no reason for banks anymore. Consumer banks. Why you just borrow? Why aren't you paying zero interest on all consumer? Why don't we all have little debit cards? And if we want to borrow money, we go in, and it's all statistical anyway. So why can't we just do that? Why are we paying interest on those things? Why is it that we're paying all this insurance when the insurance companies are privatizing insurance that could be provided by the government for us at no cost? I'm not saying the government, the Treasury, which means it's just us. So I'm trying to show that there's a whole bunch of places in the financial system where people are doing what we consider a violation of reciprocity. All reciprocity needs to consist of productive, fully informed, warranted, voluntary transfer of demonstrated interest free of externalities. But is that productive or is it extractive? Why isn't that, if we're having all that money go out those directions, why can't we pool that money together in vast numbers, have it actually not be spent like the government does, but actually saved and have returns on that given to us? And why, furthermore, don't we have redistributions from the government if we profit, if taxes and whatever, investments, produce a profit? Because that produces the incentives for people to behave like we want. In other words, the Singapore model and these financial models produce incentives. There's no reason we don't nationalize the BlackRock, the Federal Reserve, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and etc. And the reason is, are those things contributing? Are they extracting? Now I sound like a fucking socialist, but I'm not. I'm just saying, it's just like I just apply the law, and it's one thing for us to invest in something and privatize it if it's producing a good. But if at any point it becomes extractive, which is what credit cards are, as we currently do them for consumers, is that a benefit? It's not. You think it's okay to give a college student a credit line with 20% interest and then have a college loan that costs $100,000 when the real reason we have college loans is because we can't give IQ tests as employers? That's the reason. Otherwise, employers would just take the freaking IQ test and hire you. Because what do you learn in college? I learned how to get laid and drink.
It's high school 2.0.
It's not really true. I did learn a lot in college. I made good, but aside from that, I also learned that.
You learn all the ways you can be irresponsible but still have a credential.
I was responsible to my girlfriend. She was smoking hot. Okay, I'm trying to make this. So the most important one is, why do we pay interest on mortgages? That's the biggest investment. Why do we pay interest on cars? We're just borrowing the money from ourselves. It's fiat currency. What does that mean? We're borrowing from the future us. Consumer protections. One of the things that I love to, how many people know I love to trash the French? Right, I mean, it's like part of a spiritual for me. My family, my mother's side of the family is French. And of course, Doolittle is de Doliette. It's from Avranches, Normandy, right? So they're really, so I can sort of pick on the French because it's partly my family, right? But I mean, if every bad idea begins in France. But they have a couple of good ideas, and it's usually around consumer protection. It's also around philandering, because they seem to, I guess my understanding is the French are the most philandering people on. I thought it was the Italians, but it's actually the French.
They have it well structured too. Rules.
Oh, God, just don't get me started. All right, so the primary thing is the right to repair. If we had right to repair, our products would improve a little bit, but what would happen to the number of products on the shelf? How long would they last?
Much longer.
Right. Is there any value to disposable goods? Right? There's no value. You know how old, you know what year this computer, this is great. You see this computer? You know how old this is? This is an Apple Macintosh. It's 2014. Right? Now, I paid $3,500 for this thing because it's the best you can get, right? I've had to put a new battery in it. Well, the battery almost exploded and burned my fucking house down. But aside from that, I had to put a new battery in it. I have two of them. I was like, I couldn't figure out why to buy a new one until the new chips are coming out this November. There's been no value in buying a new one. But the thing is, it lasts. You know how long my average Dell lasted? 18 months. Something broke. Right? So my point here is that we don't have the right to repair. What bothers me, I love my iPhone, right? I'm a pretty Apple-y guy, mostly because I'm a not Microsoft guy, mostly because they were my customer, and I actually understand them. But if I have my iPhone, why can't I replace the freaking battery in that thing?
Talk to the Apple ID designers.
Yeah. But you know, I have a Bowers and Wilkins, it's called a torpedo or something like that, Zeppelin. And it's a fancy music system that talks to your iPhone and that kind of stuff. The power supply went out in it. I bought the thing in 2011. It was a lot of fucking money. Of course, it's absolutely fantastic, but it was a lot of money. Can I get it repaired? You know what's wrong with it? 3 capacitors have been overloaded by a spike in the electrical system, right? I lost my television, my Samsung television. Yeah, don't give me about that. You should have had a surge protector on it. Yeah, I should have. Right? But the point is, if I was in Ukraine, I could take this board down to the local repair shop and the guy would fix it for me. Can you do that here? No, because people are too expensive. So what right to repair does is it forces people to stop producing shit products that are disposable, that end up in landfills, and that make us angry because we don't trust companies anymore. So it sounds like it's a silly thing. It's not. Economically, it's profound. You know what else it'll do? It'll drive American companies, this is the real reason I want to do it, it'll drive American companies back into prominence, and we'll repatriate stuff because it will now be economically viable to produce high quality goods in the country again. The reason we can't produce them is because we have really cheap labor producing really cheap things that are throwaway.
I like the idea of a world filled with quality.
Well, I mean, most of us would. I mean, but you know, it's also good to train people to want quality, right? We've already talked about repatriation of strategic industries. One of the reasons I'm a fan of what's his name, Peter Zeihan, is because he's big on emphasizing this, is the military design, supply, and manufacturing, materials design, supply, electronic component design and supply, manufacturing, robotics, batteries, medical, pharmaceutical, heavy equipment, automotive, and most importantly, customer service. Do you know what it costs us to have cheap customer service? Way more than we gain. I know my company did the research for Microsoft back on this, and it was the early 2000s. And there's just no way outsourcing customer service pays. It's terrible. Even outsourcing programming at that point was a loss, which wasn't what we expected to find. What about other consumer protections like end of evasion of responsibility? The person on the call must have the authority to solve the problem. There's a complete chain of liability and responsibility, so they can't get away with mortgage games, for example, because every single person in the chain is liable for it. The prohibition on punishment fees. One of the things that bothers about cell phone companies, they'll go to or other companies, they'll hire some third party to go out and sell these things, and then the punishment fee is where they make all the profit. Like they sell you a cheap plan, and then you get charged like 2 months worth of charges if you went over by 3 minutes. See if I can find anything else interesting here. I don't know if you know what churning is. You know what churning? Ever know what churning is? Churning is when you, I have one. I'm going to pick on cell phone companies. I like to. Well, they've also been my customers, so I understand them. So if I have one cell phone company, you belong to a cell phone company. You belong to some company. What happens is they offer me. I get my company gets a commission to make you change to me. And then your company gets commission to change to you. And then this is called churn. And so what's happening is all this stuff is going on, this churning. And if you look at how the cell phone companies are built and their profit structures, how much is actually built on the cost of production versus the cost of making the pretense of revenue by churn? So you look at all these companies, and there's a lot of unethical consumer practices going on. That I'm trying to just touch on a few of them, but there's a lot of unethical consumer practices that basically make us not trust the system. Why does the social media companies get to be basically institutions, in other words, infrastructure, but then they get to claim that they're not? That's my personal one. Why is the government not open business hours? What about interruption advertising?
It is auspicious that we're meeting at a public house. Throughout most of American history,
Get rid of it entirely.
Right. Is there any reason for interruption advertising? No, because we have destination advertising. You can find anything you want, right? But why do they have the right to interrupt us? Well, what would happen if we took away two things? We replaced copyright with Creative Commons, and we took away interruption advertising. You know how pretty the world would be?
Just so I'm understanding, interruption advertisement, are we talking about like when you're trying to watch something and it just...
Yes.
Commercials, billboards, criers, you know.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So the problem with this,
It looks ugly.
the problem with this is it produces bad content. It produces content as vehicles for advertising rather than content that we want to see. And if you didn't get it from Bryan's talk last night, which I think there are two major points to take away from his talk. One of them is that how it manipulates us, but the second is that the incentive to manipulate us is built in the incentives we've created, so we can change those incentives. Restore marriage, the family, and end the war on the families. I think I'm going to cut these out here. Regarding the commons. I don't want to cover that. That's too much detail. I already went over primary education. I'll just touch on secondary education. Why is it they can charge you money to sell you a fraud? What would happen if the university had to warranty their goods like every other producer did? What classes would be available in university? Huh? Well, only the ones we wanted. Now, the second thing is, how much of the 4 years you spend in university are actually helpful?
well, here's the question: why do you even need to go to university after you've been 12 years in a public institution?
Well, it depends on which public institution are you talking about. Have you had a certain institutional arrangement I don't know about?
If you you've been in school from childhood on to 18, you should, and you know nothing useful to get into the economy, and so you have to go for 4 more years? You know, can't we avoid the entire need for university for most people?
There are things you must go to university for, right? There's right. Well, you know, even accounting, right? It takes some things take 3 years. Nothing takes 4. Some things take 3 years. Most things take 1. You know, how, my favorite one is a teacher. Teachers are born; they aren't made. You can learn to be a teacher in about 3 months, right? But if you don't know, if you can't figure out how to work with the mind of a child, you shouldn't be in the job. And if you don't have the patience and actually enjoy that, you shouldn't be in it either. But I always think of PhD in education. Are you kidding me? What do you think all the nonsense comes from, and that there's constantly changing stuff in education? You know what? Education is simple. Watch what the Chinese do. It's hysterical. You know, how they educate people. It's brilliant. So, as long as that's not people coming to shoot us, that's fine. If it's a celebration, what was the question you asked? No, how was it?
Why do you need college?
Right. So you actually need college. The question is whether you need 4 years of 4-year colleges. The question is why most people can't go to, as we used to have it, trade schools. What were the
Professional schools.
They were technical trade schools, technical schools, professional schools, and universities. Why, if today, why is it that we all have to go to this place where we have the ability to do this outside of it? Well, the reason is because if I want to talk to other like-minded people of equal ability, a lot of you guys are pretty smart, you know. So if I want to do that, then I want to be in that environment. But that's not true for everything. It's actually the opposite, because as party schools will attest.
As far as like the public school setting, do they with what they actually teach in public school, do they really need 12 years to do all that stuff? Could they crunch that down?
It's not you need the years. Do you need the hours per day? You don't. Any homeschooler will tell you need a couple hours per day. Socialization is more important. Working is more important. If you have a couple of hours of school a day, you have socialization, and as soon as you're able, you have some sort of responsibility, that will produce a better person. Now, is sports good? Absolutely. Are external activities great? But in the sense of education, you only need a couple hours a day. I never did it. I never had to do homework, so I never did any homework, so I can't comment. I just remember stuff. So, I already covered the physical fitness, mindfulness series, right? I covered that yesterday. And so, but as you said, we haven't covered here it is, apprenticeship, trade school, junior college, college, and university, right? We used to have that separation. But in the post-war period, when we had all these plans for help you go to finance your college career, everybody switched from being those things to being a college or university. But they're not. And so the problem is apprenticeship. Like Germans, it's like, okay, if there's a bad idea, it came from France. If something's done right, it's probably in Germany. And if you look at the German system for producing education to get people in the workforce, they actually do it responsibly. And so it's not like we have to invent this. We just have to apply it. I already did change the mandate. Prepare generations for market competition with fitness, mindfulness, knowledge, agency, success, status, and continuously adapting competitive world by training each individual for the success in one's role in a familial, social, economic markets according to one's familial, social, economic, and market contribution, not by the false promise that we're all going to be upper class. Let's see if I can cover, if I got this. I think I've done it. That's education's last one. Okay, so that's a select view of it. And as I'm talking to you, I'm sort of thinking, I'm like, well, I'm talking about all the socialist sounding things. What I'm actually trying to do is eliminate all the extractive things, all the things that impede us that are not contributing, but through productivity. All right, I I hope that was that interesting at all? Did I cover some interesting stuff? Did I hit any wrong notes? What did people disagree with? Come up with anything you disagree with? You're just, go ahead.
So what about the boundary between, say, nationally nationalized companies versus regionally nationalized companies? Is there anything useful in there?
Can you?
So you had mentioned BlackRock and nationalizing it because it's obviously just a commodity service at this point.
Correct.
But what you will also have the tendency for monopolization at that point, and perhaps different preferences between regions. And so, is there anything useful in there with regard to nationalization?
I think that if we restore the ability to states to regulate the services provided in their states, which actually does exist today, and we remove the malincentives that will get that combination, because there isn't anything that requires insurance benefits from scale. Unfortunately, anything that requires debt financing also benefits from scale. And anything that scale you lose responsibility for. So what we want to maintain is local responsibility. Anything else? Disagree with me on something, right? Because I disagree with some of the things I said. Because it's like that pattern isn't right.
If we're already seeing government manipulate social media as far as messaging, how does giving government more control solve that problem?
Well, I wouldn't give it to government. I would say that we need to centralize. We can centralize those things in Treasury. Government means legislature and bureaucracy. But we've had private public partnerships that work just fine. And so that's what I'm advocating.
Curt, I'd like to comment on that.
I mean, here think of it, Luke. Why don't, in China, not that I'm advocating the Chinese Communist Party, but there are plenty of things where there's a public partnership and the public has a seat on the board. This prevents those behaviors.
Yeah, but using China as the example, China government does control their social media, and it is throttling what's available.
Yeah, but China doesn't have rule of law.
Yeah, we can make software that we can prove doesn't do things just as well as we can have software that demonstrates that it does do things. Mm-hmm. And so if you make those sorts of things transparent and therefore available to policy, that's what I would suggest.
I just use that as an example to represent resistance against nationalization.
Thank you. Yes. No, I understood what you're doing, and I'm thankful for the objection.
I think the word nationalization is the wrong word. Making it into part of a commons.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Yes.
Open source, distributed network.
Right.
Not centralized network.
That's actually, we need a word for that. We call our work commonsism as a joke because that's what we're trying to do is produce commons. But you're right, nationalization is the wrong word. What we're really looking for is to make sure that these organizations that are supposed to provide benefit to us are doing so that's in a manner that's in our interest.
And it becomes a public good.
It becomes a public good rather than a private good. All right. Anything else? All right. What did I just think of that I wanted to tell you? I've forgotten. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. I just went through a brief list. It's literally 100 pages, 80, 100 pages. So obviously I had to scan through it and go through a couple things. But my idea, if you get the pattern that I do want you to see, it's that there's a lot of extraction that's preventing family formation. All this privatization is actually ending up in reduction in the condition of the family, especially the condition of the middle class and down. It's destroying them, and it's purely extractive because it's unnecessary. That's how you know the difference. There's no reason we can't fix it. All right. Despite the fact that I just feel like I just advocated socialism when I'm trying to do the opposite, I'm going to move on and say thank you very much for listening to me for 2 talks in a row.